Welcome to The Power of One. This is a show that demonstrates that one person actually can make a difference and that people are doing it all the time in our community. So today, we're very, very fortunate to have Charles Loveman from Heritage Housing Partners. He's the executive director there. So thank you for being with us today, Charles.
Of course, Brian. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. So let's start with some basics. What does Heritage Housing Partners do, and maybe a little bit about its history or how it came about?
Sure. So Heritage Housing Partners is a nonprofit affordable housing developer based here in Pasadena. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, so we were founded in 1998. Within the world of affordable housing and within the world of nonprofit housing, we're somewhat unique because we only do affordable home ownership. Mm-hmm. So HHP, along with our friends at Habitat for Humanity, are really the only two organizations that I'm aware of who are in that space.
Yeah, and as opposed to, just so we're clear, as opposed to rental.
Yes, so most of the other nonprofits in California and LA County, et cetera, do affordable rental housing.
Mm-hmm. So could you describe one of the projects that you've worked on? I mean, in particular, I'm really interested about the one at Fair Oaks and Peoria.
Sure.
And maybe what it was like before and what it is now.
Sure. So, HHP was founded in 1998. I came along in 2001 and became the executive director. And in the very beginning, we did very small projects. So we did 1 or 2 units on a lot. We were originally founded as a subsidiary or a supporting corporation to Pasadena Heritage. So that's where
right.
Heritage comes from. And the mission was to do affordable housing in historic buildings.
Oh, I didn't know that. That makes sense though, because Pasadena Heritage is focused on protecting
exactly. So exactly. And so the historic, I describe it as sometimes it's a capital H historic, like a National Register building. Sometimes it's a local landmark, or sometimes it's historic small H, where it's just a nice old house that there's no reason not to keep in rehab.
Yeah.
So we did, my first 3 years or so, we did these small kind of what I call onesie-twosie deals. Yeah. And in 2003 or 2004, the opportunity to buy this 1.5 acre site at the corner of Fair Oaks and Peoria came along. The person who owned that property had assembled, I think, 13 or 14 separate lots. And there were a bunch of old houses, and there were 2 and 3 families living in those houses. It was kind of a blighted, pretty beat up housing.
Yeah, I was going to say the conditions there, I recall, were not high quality.
No, they were not high quality. It was tough on everyone. It was tough on the neighborhood around that property. So I remember, probably in 2003, because we were not really surviving as an organization doing 1 and 2 units at a time. And so we had a board meeting that I remember well, where we decided we're going to go for this, we're going to swing for the fences and try and do this 40-unit project at Fair Oaks and Peoria. And it's way beyond what we'd ever done. And we're either going to be successful with this, or we're going to go out of business. I didn't realize it was so tenuous at that time.
Oh well, that focuses your mind. I thought you were established.
Well, I did half my time I spent writing grants, because you can't pay the bills when you're just doing 1 or 2 houses a year. So anyway, that was a big deal on all kinds of levels for us. But it also demonstrated, I think, what became, I describe it as our DNA. So our DNA is combining historic preservation with new construction. Our DNA is lots of open space, because our buyers typically are young families, low and moderate income families who, they have kids and they want a lot of play space. There was actually, we originally, when we designed that, we had parking at the surface, and I remember presenting the project to Councilwoman Joyce Streeter, and she looked at the site plan and said, "Where are the kids going to play?" Yeah. And I said, "Well, we could create open space if we push the parking underground, but that'll cost a lot more money." And she said, "We'll find the money. You push the parking underground." So she was kind of the hero of all that. But lots of open space. a mix of unit types from 1 bedroom to 4 bedroom, a mix of incomes from low income, moderate income, what we call workforce income, and market rate by households all living together in that community.
Yeah, and that raises a few questions, but one to start off with is, from your perspective, what's the value of having mixed incomes in one place?
Oh, well, I think that's the way real life is. So, it's one of the problems with affordable housing because you're building what the funding wants you to build, and the funding usually wants you to build a 100% affordable project. But the world is a mixed income world, and that's so just to be able to create that is what our goal is. We don't always succeed. Sometimes, the funding says you have to build 100% affordable, so that's what we do.
Yeah, but it's creating real life conditions so that people are able to interact with one another, build friendships, relationships, build trust between neighbors.
Oh, totally.
And that really happens because you're proximate. You're close to each other.
Right. And in a way, I describe it as a giant social experiment because we build it, we have these units, people apply to live there, we pick the applicants based on a bunch of criteria related to are they in the income ranges that they need to be, and are they able are they credit worthy in terms of getting a mortgage, and then we throw them all together and we see how it works. And Fair Oaks has been extremely successful in terms of how everyone just sort of gets along.
Yeah, every time I go in there, I feel really comfortable. Yeah. And you can sense that there is tranquility, that there's a peaceful atmosphere and that people get along.
Right, well, the credit goes to all the homeowners who live there, but yes.
Yeah, would you mind, do you have a story of someone who lives there? And maybe, because I think part of the reason why the story is important is also to understand because affordable housing is so challenging, or housing costs, better stated, are so challenging in California, but in particular in our city. And I really liked what you had to say about its families.
Right.
So a lot of families and a lot of my relatives, they're either living together or having to move out, Lancaster or, other faraway cities. So how has it benefited a family at the Fair Oaks Peoria site?
Well, so I always tell everyone that really the difference between us and any other real estate developer is that last, the day we hand the keys to an income qualified, an affordable buyer. Otherwise, we're like everyone else. When we go to a contract, sign a general construction contract, they don't say, "Oh, you're a nonprofit. We're going to give you a 20% discount." Yeah, it doesn't happen. So we're like anybody else, except for that last day when we get to give the keys to someone, and that's the big payoff for our organization. So when we did Fair Oaks Court, that was our first big deal, and we decided we were going to interview every applicant. So we created a little interview panel that consisted of staff and a board member and actually someone from the Housing Rights Center, so we didn't ask the wrong questions. And in that kind of a process, that was really interesting to see everyone who was trying, this is 10 years ago now, everyone who was trying to become a home buyer.
Yeah, it's been that long.
It's been that long. Yeah. The folks who are very confident, the folks who are very outgoing do really well in that kind of setting. There was one applicant who was very shy, didn't say much, but she had a really compelling story. She worked for a public agency, had worked for a public agency for a long time, was still working there, had 2 kids, 2 teenage kids, a boy and a girl. They were living in a 1-bedroom apartment where the 2 teenage kids were sleeping in the 1 bedroom and then she was sleeping on the couch. And I remember asking her, so every night she would unfold the couch and set up the sofa bed, and then in the morning, turn it back into a sofa. Anyway, long story short, she became a home buyer. She just didn't think, so we picked her, we selected her as one of the 40 buyers. And that day when you go take her and say, "This is your unit," and we give her the keys, I'm starting to choke up. And she just burst into tears. And I was just so worried. And the kids ran upstairs to pick, because it was a 3-bedroom unit she bought. And so her 2 children were running upstairs.
So they had their own rooms.
They had their own rooms, and there was all this joy on their part. She was just gushing because it was the disbelief that something something so good and fortunate could happen to her and her family. And I felt so happy to be able to be a part of that. And everyone associated with HHP, we get these stories all the time.
So from your perspective, how does then stable, clean, relatively affordable housing, how does that change people's lives?
Well, it changes people's lives. That's a good question. I've seen the outcomes. So I've seen, especially, so at Fair Oaks, we decided to put our office at Fair Oaks.
Oh, right.
And one of the reasons we did that is because we wanted to see what we built and if it worked. And the only way to really judge, whether how people use the units and the spaces and everything else we created was to be there on site and watch it. And so and it's 10 years later, I've watched these little kids grow up. I've watched some of these kids go off to college. So there's just this stability of knowing that you're a homeowner. In fact, one of the surprising observations I had, two of the surprising observations I had when we were doing those interviews for Fair Oaks were, first of all, a number of applicants were people who were already in affordable rental housing. But they wanted to become homeowners.
Homeowners, right.
Yeah, and I would ask them why you're paying whatever they were paying in rent, but you're paying an affordable rent relative to your income. Why do you want to be a homeowner? Yeah. And it was just this sort of psychic kind of fundamental thing. They wanted to own the roof over their head. And they didn't want to have a landlord. And I would say, is it the tax benefits? What tax benefits? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they probably weren't even aware of it.
Yeah, they weren't aware of it. No, there was just this real drive to become a homeowner.
Yeah, but I think that's I don't think that's unique. I think that many people in our society would, if they could choose, they would love to own instead of rent. Do you have any idea? I mean, I kind of have a guess, but do you have any idea what the percentage is of homeowners versus renters in our city?
I think it's still slightly more toward renters, but I think it's around 53% renters or so.
Yeah.
And probably homeownership rates have gone down everywhere throughout the U.S. since 2008. It was probably more like 50-50 prior to that.
I think those are the stats that I'm familiar with too.
Yeah.
So why is housing so expensive?
Why is housing so expensive? Well, I think the fundamental reason in California, so first of all, California there's this housing crisis, why housing is so expensive, is happening all over, but it's really acute here. If you look at other cities, and we actually did this, you look at Austin, Texas, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Denver, Colorado, and we looked at what was the sort of match between a household that was making the median income, could they afford to buy the median priced house? And in a lot of those cities they could. In California, no, you can't come close.
Yeah, I have a cousin who got a job for a company, and they moved him out to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, there you go.
And every time I talk to him, I start crying because he has like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, several thousand, 1,500, 1,800 square feet, and I think he paid $150,000 for it or something like that.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So the number one reason, we're just not building enough units. We used to build, I can't remember the exact numbers, but around 100,000 or so units a year more than we're building now. That was before the Great Recession. So just not building enough units. And then a lot of affordable housing money has been taken off the table. The loss of the redevelopment, the housing piece of redevelopment was a big blow to everyone. And a lot of the people who built the market rate houses, out in the Inland Empire, they're gone because they got wiped out in the Great Recession. So there's just not enough units being built.
Yeah, for the demand.
For the demand across the board.
Yeah, but so absence of being able to accelerate the production because of the demand, what are some other ways that we can help people, especially those young families, to stay in our community so that they don't have to try to move out to Victorville or Moreno Valley or San Bernardino?
Well, so I think of it as sort of, so we think of housing as sort of this broad spectrum of need. excuse me, from people who don't have a house, the homeless, to middle-income people
Yeah.
who make a good salary but can't live in Pasadena or can't live in LA County or many parts of LA County. And I think the solution depends on where you are on that spectrum. So clearly affordable housing, moderate income, low income, very low income, extremely low income are the 4 categories under state law. You're going to need public subsidy to do that. There's just a big gap. When we build a unit, it costs anywhere from $550,000 to $600,000 to build a unit, all in. Land costs, construction costs, everything.
It's $500,000 to build a unit?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So, and if we sell that unit for $275,000, there's a big gap.
Yeah.
So we need some place to go to fill that gap. And there used to be a lot more sources. So the county had a lot of funding both for rental and for sale housing. The state had money for both rental and for sale. And the city of Pasadena always recognized that they need to do both. The city in terms of the city generating its own money, I think they're still more or less on track, but the state and the county well, the state's way down, the feds are way down. I think I saw a statistic from the housing department that they have something like 10% of what they used to have in terms of housing resources from other public, from other levels of government.
Yeah.
So there's just not enough subsidy.
And just to play the devil's advocate, is it possible at all for the market to catch up? I mean, because there is a limited amount of land or space, especially in a place like Pasadena, I'm not sure even if you unleashed developers and said, go ahead and build, that you'd be able to keep up with the demand. But what do you think?
Well, so I think for kind of middle income households, they probably need some kind of kickstart to get that going. Yeah. And we think that that's where the private sector, if someone can figure out how to bring private dollars to that equation, that probably makes sense. I don't know that you'd ask the public sector to finance middle income housing, but folks who are making 80 grand, 90 grand, they can't afford a house in Pasadena. They need some help. And then at the high end, no one needs any help. But no, I think that there's lots of land in Pasadena. There's a lot of underutilized land. Little by little by little, the city will grow. Yeah. And it'll, I think they've done a good job of, for the most part, keeping growth out of neighborhoods and putting growth near transit. But the example we talked about before we went on air about Lincoln and Orange Grove, we just bought that. So there's almost an acre of land at the corner of Lincoln and Orange Grove that was an abandoned gas station. Gas station left in the 1990s.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because actually the neighbors and the neighborhood, they've been very concerned about that property. And actually those 4 corners are not the most attractive that you could come across within the context of the city. So how did you get connected to that piece of property, and then what are your plans for doing it?
So the city came up with what I think is a really creative kind of incentive for us to use city funding. And that is, you can use city funding to do affordable homeownership projects if you take out a blighting land use. So we knew that there was some funding available, and we were looking at blighting land uses, which is a defined thing under the city code. Yeah. So the abandoned gas station clearly met that criteria. Liquor stores meet that criteria. We are just finishing a project where...
Yeah, it's Summit in Orange Grove,
Summit in Orange Grove.
Yeah, there was a liquor store there that was really a negative impact on the neighborhood.
Right, and so we used the same tool a couple years ago, and again, city money to help take out a blighting land use. So when I knew that there was funding that was going to be available, I guess starting at the end of last year, or earlier, the end of 2016, we were starting to talk to all these property owners who owned blighted property. It took and that one really, the more I got involved with that property, I could see how that corner being vacant and blighted for all those years has done such damage to that neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And so that really, it became really a goal to figure out how to make that deal work.
Yeah, and it's from a neighbor perspective too, it's kind of like, well, you don't really care about our neighborhood, and you, meaning the city, doesn't really care.
Yeah,
because if it were in a different part of the city, and I'm sure this is the same in any community around the country, if it were in a different part of the city, it wouldn't have lasted this long.
Absolutely, it would have been developed a long time ago. So yeah, that has held back probably that neighborhood. And then you have the post office on the other corner, you have the abandoned nursery on the other corner. So that's a 100% location for some tough real estate. And we hope that. So anyway, we're very excited to get title to that property, and we hope that we'll turn that around. It'll take 2 or 3 years to deliver on what we want to deliver. But I use that as an example. If you really look closely, there are lots of underutilized sites. There's lots of stories like that. They just, you need to, like the Fair Oaks and Peoria site, where that was, it just took a long time to get that property owner to trust us, to be willing to sell his property to us. So you just have to kind of go in and battle away.
Well, yeah, you have to be creative as far as the, whether it's taking out an existing use or repurposing land. And you're probably right, throughout the city, whether it's formally used as potentially commercial use or something like that, and then transforming that into residential.
Right.
And you also mentioned the planning that the city has gone through to increase density in the central corridor and then keep it out of existing neighborhoods.
Right.
And that's been underway for more than 10 years, I think.
Yeah, no, I think they've been successful at that. And you can see the results of that. And just when I go to Old Pasadena, there's a lot more units than there used to be on the edges of Old Pasadena. There's more coming. Old Pasadena has gotten younger as a result of that. It seems like it's a little more lively place than it used to be. So I think it's all good. And of course, all those units are close to transit. So it works the way it's supposed to be working.
Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left, not too much time. But how did you get into this? I mean, why is this so important to you, and why have you stuck with it for, almost 20 years now?
Yeah, a long time. Well, I'm a city planner by training, and I really came to this because of the love of historic buildings. I worked at the Los Angeles Redevelopment Agency many years ago, and that's an historic downtown with lots of historic buildings. So the historic preservation piece was sort of the first part of it. And then I just watched as a planner in LA as city after city across the US converted their old historic office buildings into lofts and other forms of housing. And so,
and like in downtown LA, you see a lot of that happening.
You see a lot of that happening as well. And then the affordable piece was just, I think, another level of attraction. I love the home ownership part of it. I love that we, there's all our colleagues in the nonprofit world who do affordable rental housing and do a great job. But I love that we have this little niche where we're helping people become homeowners, and all the benefits that leads to long term.
Right. It's a mechanism by which they move into the middle class, or a more stable place in the middle class, because then you have something that you can draw equity from.
Exactly.
And you also have, as you mentioned before, the tax credit.
Right.
So there are numerous benefits. And then whether this is good or bad, society sometimes is structured to be preferential to homeowners as opposed to renters. So it helps them to take advantage of that situation as well.
Yeah, although like we said, a lot of them don't even know that those benefits exist. Yeah. They just had this need to become a homeowner. But it does create stability. It's certainly financial stability because you have a fixed rate mortgage, so that payment stays the same. Yeah. And then over time, you build equity.
So how has this job benefited your life in this position?
You know, I have had a few jobs in my career, and I realized that this was the job I was meant to have. Everything else was just kind of a warm-up to get to here, because this draws on all my skills. You know, I think if someone said, well, what's Charles's real strength? It's kind of probably real estate, on the financial side of real estate. And so
You mean putting together the package?
Putting together the financing deal, yeah. And I did that before I got to HHP with other companies. But it's always a challenge for homeownership to be able to figure out how to find the money and put the project together. And then because my planning and design background, I love the architectural side of it. But like I said before, the payoff of we're working for a purpose. We're not like every other guy who's grinding away to build a project, because at the end we get to really change some family's life. So I love that about what I do.
Yeah, so where do you see you going in the next few years?
Where I see HHP going, well, I think I see myself staying at HHP.
Maybe both.
I would love for us to expand our reach. So we do this one thing and we do it really, really well. We did a market rate project last year, almost as a kind of an experiment to see if we could.
Oh, was that on Marengo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was very successful. Very happy with how that turned out. But because if we're always looking for subsidies, maybe we can take advantage of the high sales prices and generate our own subsidies by doing either a market rate project that
in a different place.
In a different place, or just mixed income with market and affordable, and then have the market subsidize the affordable. So that's sort of one area where we haven't created a project around that theory, but that's something that we're looking at, and I would like to be able to do more of that. I'd love to do mixed use, a little bit of retail or commercial in our projects. And I'm paying a lot of attention to what's going on in the world of permanent supportive housing. We really haven't figured out any role for us yet, but that's a big crisis.
Well, yeah, and there are some solid partners here in town you can work with, collaborate with.
There are.
But I guess what I would say, kind of in closing, is it sounds like you're still excited by the work and you're inspired by it, and you're actually creative and thinking about other ways that you can help families to move into the middle class or to find opportunities for home ownership.
That's what we try to do.
Yeah. Well, it's been terrific to have you on today, and I really appreciate it. And I so much appreciate the work that HHP is doing, because if it weren't for you, it would be tough, I think, for the city to have really multiple areas or multiple places where people can find housing, affordable housing, and to be able to buy it.
Well, that's kind of you. I should acknowledge in closing the staff at HHP, the board of directors at HHP, and then the city of Pasadena, who has been our great partner for all these years. So we're happy we're here, and if we could do all our projects in Pasadena, we would be happy about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here today, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Brian.